On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901, a sightseeing tour bound for Antarctica, ended in tragedy when the aircraft crashed into the slopes of Mount Erebus, a towering volcano on Ross Island. All 257 passengers and crew members perished in what became known as the Mount Erebus disaster, one of the deadliest aviation accidents in New Zealand's history. This narrative explores the events leading up to the crash, the investigations that followed, and the profound impact this disaster had on aviation safety and the public trust in Air New Zealand.
Air New Zealand Flight 901 was a DC-10 aircraft operating a popular scenic flight to Antarctica. These flights were designed to provide passengers with stunning aerial views of the frozen continent, flying at low altitudes over points of interest such as the Ross Ice Shelf and Mount Erebus, the southernmost active volcano on Earth. Passengers included tourists, scientists, and crew members eager to witness Antarctica's natural beauty. The flight on November 28 was expected to follow the standard route established for previous flights. However, an unintentional change in the plane's flight coordinates just hours before takeoff set the stage for disaster. The coordinates placed the aircraft on a path directly toward Mount Erebus rather than following the standard safe route along McMurdo Sound.
On the morning of November 28, 1979, Flight 901 departed from Auckland with 237 passengers and 20 crew members aboard. The flight was scheduled to last approximately 11 hours, and the weather forecast indicated relatively clear conditions over Antarctica. The crew was not made aware of the change in the flight path, which placed the aircraft dangerously close to the slopes of Mount Erebus. As the DC-10 approached Antarctica, the weather began to deteriorate. The phenomenon of whiteout conditions, where the horizon becomes indistinguishable from the ground due to overcast skies and snow, set in, making it nearly impossible for the crew to visually detect Mount Erebus. Unaware of the terrain ahead and relying on faulty navigation data, the crew continued to descend for a better view of the Antarctic landscape. At 12:49 p.m., just as the crew was flying at 1,500 feet, the aircraft slammed into the slopes of Mount Erebus at a speed of around 300 knots, 345 miles per hour. The impact instantly destroyed the aircraft, scattering wreckage across the snow-covered volcano. All 257 people aboard Flight 901 were killed in the crash.
The loss of Flight 901 sent shockwaves through New Zealand and the international aviation community. Air New Zealand was widely regarded as a reliable airline, and the idea that a sightseeing tour could end in such catastrophic failure was unimaginable. News of the disaster reached McMurdo Station, a nearby U.S. research facility, which launched the initial search and rescue operations. However, it quickly became clear that there were no survivors. The harsh conditions on Mount Erebus made recovery efforts difficult. The wreckage was scattered across a wide area, and the extreme cold and altitude posed significant challenges to the rescue and investigation teams. Nonetheless, the bodies of the passengers and crew were recovered over the following weeks, bringing a measure of closure to the grieving families.
The Mount Erebus disaster led to two major investigations, one conducted by New Zealand's Chief Inspector of Air Accidents and the other, a Royal Commission of Inquiry led by Justice Peter Mahone. The initial investigation by the Civil Aviation Division largely placed the blame on pilot error, asserting that the crew had descended below the safe altitude in poor visibility conditions, despite safety protocols. However, the Royal Commission of Inquiry, led by Justice Mahone, came to a very different conclusion. Mahone uncovered critical information that had been overlooked in the original investigation. Just before the flight, Air New Zealand's ground staff had altered the flight coordinates without informing the crew. This change in the flight path placed the aircraft directly on a collision course with Mount Erebus. Mahone's findings shifted the blame away from the crew, highlighting a combination of factors that contributed to the disaster, including poor communication, inadequate navigation equipment, and the failure to inform the crew of the flight path change. In his report, Mahone famously accused Air New Zealand of an orchestrated litany of lies, suggesting that the airline had attempted to cover up its role in the disaster. The findings were both shocking and controversial, leading to a public outcry in New Zealand. Air New Zealand, which had previously maintained its reputation as one of the world's safest airlines, found itself at the center of a scandal. The airline, while initially defensive, eventually accepted the findings of the Royal Commission and took steps to improve its safety protocols and operational transparency.
The Mount Erebus disaster had a profound and lasting impact on New Zealand's aviation industry and its national psyche. The tragedy, and the subsequent inquiry, resulted in significant changes to aviation safety procedures, particularly around navigational accuracy, communication between aircrew and ground staff, and the importance of accurate flight planning. Air New Zealand overhauled its operational practices in the wake of the disaster, focusing on improving pilot training, cockpit communication, and navigation systems. The airline also discontinued its Antarctic sightseeing flights, recognizing the inherent risks associated with flying in such extreme environments. The disaster's legacy also influenced the global aviation industry, particularly in the area of crew resource management, CRM. The importance of clear, assertive communication between pilots and ground staff became a key focus in aviation safety training, ensuring that all crew members have the authority to question decisions when safety is at risk. For New Zealand, the Mount Erebus disaster remains a tragic chapter in its history. Memorials were erected to honor the victims, and the disaster is remembered each year by the families and communities affected by the tragedy. The incident serves as a reminder of the inherent risks of air travel, particularly in extreme conditions, and the critical importance of transparency, communication, and accountability in aviation operations.
The Mount Erebus disaster was a tragedy of monumental proportions, claiming the lives of 257 people and leaving a lasting mark on New Zealand's aviation industry. While the disaster revealed serious flaws in Air New Zealand's operational practices, the courageous work of Justice Mahone's inquiry ensured that the truth behind the crash came to light, leading to meaningful reforms in aviation safety. Today, the legacy of Mount Erebus lives on, reminding us of the importance of clear communication, operational transparency, and the continuous pursuit of safer skies.